when darkness glimpsed the sun. When darkness glimpsed the sun, words granted. How long do we have to live in these prisons of hell, suffocating? We have rotted in the sewage of misfortune like helpless worms till today. Those who disrobed our rags-clad dignity at the town square should know that their end is near. The poem that sounds this ultimatum is by Namdev Dhasal. Today, in the 77th episode of Granthyatra, we are going to discuss Dhasal's collection of poetry called Golpitha. A warm welcome to all the viewers. Namdev Dhasal was born in the year 1949 in village Pur in Khed district. As the family faced extreme poverty, Dhasal moved to Mumbai with his father at a very young age. His childhood was spent in the slums of the red light district in Mumbai called Golpitha. When he grew up, Dhasal worked as a taxi driver in Mumbai for many years. Inspired by Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar's philosophy, Dhasal gave voice to the misery and pain of Dalits through his poems. In 1972, he established an organization called Dalit Panther and led protests to seek solutions for the problems faced by Dalits. His first collection of poetry, Golpitha, was published in 1972, but the poems in this collection were written in the 1960s. This was the period of rebellion by the so-called untouchables and by those newly educated classes who had converted to Buddhism after taking inspiration from Dr. Ambedkar. It was a revolution against the slavery endured for thousands of years. There was a new enlightenment in the oppressed class against the age-old customs and practices that curtailed their human rights as a result of inspiration gained from Gautam Buddha, Charvak, Mahatma Phule, Savitribai Phule, Karl Marx, Ramabai Ambedkar, Lenin, Mao Zedong, Martin Luther King, and Nelson Mandela, along with Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar. It was this period that gave rise to scintillating literature in Marathi that protested against such customs, that blasted the established social order, and that demanded equal rights for the oppressed. It had repercussions in several Indian languages and even in literature outside India. Namdev Dhasal was an important poet in this revolutionary literary movement that came to be called as Dalit Literature. Dhasal demolished historical and contemporary linguistic, thematic and formulaic norms of poetry, says Dr. Satish Kalsekar in an article. The themes and language of the poems in Golpitha are so unique that Vijay Tendulkar, the well-known dramatist, felt the need to understand the experiential world that had given rise to this poetry before writing a preface to Dhasal's collection. The world of Dhasal's poetry, that goes by the name of Golpitha in Mumbai, begins where the boundaries of the white-collared world end and where no man's land begins as far as the white-collared world is concerned, writes Tendulkar. This is the world of the day that begins at night, the world of half-filled or empty bellies, of miseries of death, of worries for future, of residual bodies when propriety and sensations have turned to ashes, of drains that flow with zest, a world of the unemployed, of beggars and pickpockets. Dhasal writes, all said and done, they are the rulers and have locked away light in their lockers. Not even the footpath belongs to us in this forced, derelict life. They have made us so helpless that we abhor being humans. We can't find even mud to fill our burnt guts. Every new day, as if bribed, backs them. Not even a sigh from its generous hand, even when we are being massacred. Tendulkar writes that Ambedkar introduced anger, an important characteristic of human existence, to the downtrodden masses. Ambedkar passed away. Torture, oppression, humiliation did not stop. Discrimination continued. The centuries-old wounds continued to bleed. Dhasal's poetry has an inseparable and deep relation to these wounds. Bottomless anguish and rage spurts out like flames through every word of his poetry. Life's unbearable scorching turns into poetry through Dhasal's words. Look at these lines. Oh, the countless suns burning in blood, your mothers and sisters continue to be violated at fairs. Oh, the countless suns burning in blood, come and torch these cities. Tendulkar writes, when Namdev Dhasal's poetry surges ahead, tossing the boiling lava of life's infinite rage all over the established and pretentious world, and calling upon the countless suns burning in the blood, refusing to be travelers of darkness, and instigating torching of cities, I am awestruck by the dazzling and authentic rebellion rarely seen in the contemporary Marathi poetry. This is the poetry that is committed to destroying the established social order that was the root cause of the inhuman torture experienced by Dalits. The very dedication of this book announces the thesis of this poetry. This poetry collection is dedicated to all small and big movements and tendencies that are trying to destroy the oppressive systems that keep the common man away from power, wealth, and prestige. An intense anger against the pretensions of the establishment is evident everywhere in Dhasal's poetry. He writes, the so-called learned men roam with torches in hand through lanes and by-lanes. They say they understand the darkness in our shanties where even rats starve to death. Just another posturing like watery milk. Commenting on Dhasal's poetry, Arundhati Subramaniam writes, Dhasal is a quintessentially Mumbai poet. Raw, raging, associative, almost carnal in its tactility, his poetry emerges from the underbelly of the city, its menacing, unplumbed netherworld. Through his revolutionary poetry, Dhasal raised doubts about the greatness of the so-called upper class in the social order that was quietly accepted until then. One forcing the other to live on wastewater means both creating friction between themselves. Through lines such as these, he highlights the friction inherent in an unequal society. The poet has realized that the oppression will continue, but its acceptance must stop, says Vasanta Abaji Dahake in his book about poetry. Dhasal's poetry underlines the fact that the oppressed classes have now realized that their degraded life has been forced upon them, that they have been made helpless by the oppressors. Dhasal reiterates through his poetry that the political independence obtained by a society where a class of people is discriminated against, where one group is subjugated, is meaningless. He fiercely makes statements such as 15th August is a suspicious lapse or independence is the name of which Jenny. For Dhasal, writing poetry was a political act. It was a political stance in terms of human life. Comrade, this is not democracy, it's humiliation of 17 generations nurtured by quiet acceptance. This is not light, it's a torture chamber. Through lines such as these, he awakens the oppressed strata of society to reality. On reading Dhasal's poetry, we become acutely aware of the truth that independence and democracy, whose paeans are sung by the so-called upper class, have not reached those at the bottom of the society. Just as this poetry provides a new viewpoint to look at the established social order, it also makes us realize that the established poetic norms too are applicable only to a narrow literary field. For example, the rains, described by most poets as a symbol of nature's beauty, of yearning for love, of lovers' separation, or a symbol of plenty, turn into an oppressor of the poor in Dhasal's poetry. This demonic shower, uprooting some new mother, starving some scavenger, leeching some leper, robbing a poor of his essence, forcing him to beg for a morsel, dousing the stove. Dhasal has used the colloquial language very effectively in his poetry. In the preface to this collection, Vijay Tendulkar writes that Dhasal makes the noble language nurtured with grandeur by the white-collared strata bow like a slave. He disrupts it mercilessly, or by adding indecent phrases, deliberately makes it ugly. He deems it necessary to convey the desired meaning in his poetry. Dhasal writes, "Here the soul doesn't burn with fire inside, and creations have turned to ashes dear. Every epic poet here always falls short. It's not appropriate to be swayed by delicacy of the words dear. Man eats man here, and cane marks on the poet's body are concealed dear." To talk about such intensely perceptive and revolutionary poetry of Namdev Dhasal, we have with us today Professor Manohar Jadhaw.
नमस्कार मित्रांनो, आज आपण ढसाळांच्या गोलपिठा या कविता संग्रहाच्या संदर्भात बोलणार आहोत. मगाशी अर्चनाताईने अतिशय विस्तृत असं विवेचन केलेलं आहे. तोच धागा पकडून मी एक 3 ते 4 मिनिटं माझं विवेचन करीन. नामदेव ढसाळांच्या कवितेची प्रेरणा प्रामुख्याने डॉक्टर बाबासाहेब आंबेडकर यांचा विचार आणि चळवळ ही आहे. म्हणजे त्यांच्या प्रेरणाचा जर शोध घेत गेलो आपण तर आपल्याला बरीचशी नावं सांगता येतील. अर्चनाताईने ती सांगितली देखील, पण प्राधान्याने किंवा प्रामुख्याने डॉक्टर बाबासाहेब आंबेडकर यांचा विचार आणि चळवळ यातून त्यांना जी ऊर्जा मिळालेली आहे ती त्यांच्या कवितेमधून व्यक्त झालेली आहे. त्याचं कारण असं की ढसाळ दरवर्षी एक तरी कविता बाबासाहेब आंबेडकरांवर लिहित असत आणि कालांतराने त्यांनी या सगळ्या कवितांचं संकलन केलं आणि कविता संग्रह प्रकाशित केला. त्या कविता संग्रहाचं नाव आहे तुझे बोट धरून चाललो आहे मी. गोलपीठामधल्या जवळपास सगळ्याच कविता या वाचनीय आहेत. काही कवितांचा लवकर अर्थ लागत नाही. त्याचं कारण त्याच्या मागची जी पार्श्वभूमी आहे ती तात्काळ लक्षात येत नाही. नामदेव ढसाळांची गोलपीठामधली कविता समजून घेण्यासाठी विजय तेंडुलकरांनी लिहिलेली प्रस्तावना आपल्याला मदत करतेच, पण नामदेव ढसाळ व्यक्ती आणि माणूस हा जर तुम्हाला माहित असेल, त्यांचं जीवन जर तुम्हाला माहित असेल, तर मला वाटतं ती कविता अधिक चांगल्या पद्धतीने आपल्याला कळू शकेल. गोलपीठामध्ये माणसाने नावाची ही कविता आहे. ती माझी आवडती कविता आहे. गोलपीठा हा कविता संग्रह जरी आवडता असला तरी यातली सगळ्यात जास्त आवडणारी कविता कोणती असं जर विचारलं तर मी उत्तर देईन की माणसाने ही कविता अप्रतिम आहे. म्हणजे त्या कवितेतून ढसाळांचं एक भावविश्व, विचार विश्व, जीवनाकडे पाहण्याचा दृष्टिकोन, समग्र समाज व्यवस्थेचं आकलन हे त्यांनी मांडलेलं आहे. गोलपीठामधली जी भाषा आहे आणि ज्या प्रतिमा आहेत त्याच्यावर त्या काळामध्ये प्रस्थापितांकडून फार मोठ्या प्रमाणात टीका झाली होती. शिवराळ भाषेचा वापर ढसाळांनी कवितेमध्ये केलेला आहे असं प्राधान्याने त्या टीकेचा रोख होता. त्याला त्यावेळी ढसाळांनी उत्तर दिलेलं आहे. पण नंतरच्या काळामध्ये जेव्हा अनेक समीक्षकांनी ढसाळांच्या कवितेचा परामर्श घेतला तेव्हा त्या कवितेतली बलस्थानं ही त्यांनी सांगितली. सगळ्यात महत्वाचं म्हणजे ढसाळांच्या जीवनानुभवाची जी भाषा आहे त्या भाषेमधूनच ढसाळांनी अभिव्यक्ती केलेली आहे. कारण त्यांची व्यवहारातली भाषा, जीवनातली भाषा, जगण्यातली भाषा जी आहे त्याचाच आधार त्यांनी घेतलाय. म्हणजे अभिजनांची भाषा किंवा प्रमाण भाषा हा त्यांचा अनुभव आविष्कृत करू शकलीच नसते. आणि शोषित वर्गाच्या समष्टीचं चित्रण हे ढसाळांनी अतिशय प्रभावीपणे केलेलं आहे. गोलपिठा वाचताना एक गोष्ट आपल्या लक्षात येते की ढसाळांनी कोणाचं अनुकरण केलं नाही आणि मराठीतल्या कोणत्याही कवीला प्रमाण मानलेलं नाही. त्यांनी स्वतःच ती वाटचाल केलेली आहे. मगाशी मी सांगितलं त्याप्रमाणे जीवनानुभवातून जी भाषा त्यांना सापडली किंवा त्यांची जी भाषा होती त्या भाषेमधूनच ते अभिव्यक्त झालेले आहेत. मगाशी मी सांगितलं की ढसाळांनी कोणाचं अनुकरण केलं नाही, मात्र नामदेव ढसाळांचं अनुकरण अनेकांनी केलं. पण ते अनुकरण जरी केलेलं असलं तरी ती कविता ढसाळांच्या कवितेच्या पुढे गेलेली नाही. शेवटी अनुकरण हे अनुकरणच असतं. म्हणजे गोलपिठा किंवा ढसाळांची एकूणच कविता ही केवळ दलित कविताच नव्हे तर एकूण मराठी कवितेत ढसाळांची मुद्रा ही अमीट स्वरूपाची आहे. म्हणजे मराठीमध्ये अतिशय वैभवशाली अशी कविता जी म्हणता येईल ती ढसाळांची कविता आहे. मला सारखं असं वाटतं, नेहमी असं वाटतं की ढसाळांची कविता योग्य वेळी अनेक भारतीय भाषेत किंवा विविध विदेशी भाषेत जर अनुवादित झाली असती तर नामदेव ढसाळ या कवीचा विचार जागतिक परिप्रेक्ष्यामध्ये झाला असता. इतका मोलाचा महत्वाचा हा कवी आहे. पण ते होऊ शकलं नाही. कदाचित पुढच्या काळामध्ये जर असे प्रयत्न झालेत तर ढसाळांना न्याय मिळू शकेल. मित्र, या निमित्ताने मला ढसाळांच्या कवितेवर बोलण्याची संधी मिळाली त्याबद्दल मी अर्चनाताईंचे आभार मानतो आणि या ठिकाणी थांबतो. धन्यवाद.
Even when inciting Dalits to overthrow the established social structure, Dhasal's poetry never turns preachy. It stays true to the reality that the poet lived in his life. He left the raving fire at the cave's entrance yesterday. I am going to keep torching the future now. I hope you like the poems of the poet who heralds a new era in poetry through lines such as these, and that his poetry will widen your world of perceptions. We shall meet in the next episode of Granthyatra to discuss a novel based on the life of a trailblazing woman. Until then, keep reading.